Good morning. I am Dr. Alencia Bowen, Dean of the Ross College of Business and Executive Director of the Leadership Center and Co-Executive Director of the Global Center for Healthcare Leadership. I am so excited that each of you have joined us today for the launch of our powerful, unmistakable Legacy Leaders series here at Franklin University. We are so honored to have Stephanie Revish with us. Stephanie is currently the Vice President of Financial Planning and Analysis at Target. In this role, she is responsible for partnering across the enterprise to optimize and prioritize over $4 billion in annual capital spending, while also driving growth via strategic market positioning and valuation for Target's overall portfolio of approximately 2,000 stores. Prior to joining Target, Stephanie spent time at Cardinal Health, Henry Schein, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and OCLC. Stephanie participates in a number of leadership efforts focused on the advancement of the Columbus community, mentorship, and diversity in the workplace. She has also been awarded the 2020 Healthcare Businesswomen's Association Luminary Award, the 2020 National Diversity Council's Top 50 Financial Leaders Award, the Fisher College of Business Project Thrive Alumnus of the Year Award, and is a graduate of Leadership Columbus. I must also share that Stephanie is also on the advisory board for the Leadership Center. Stephanie earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's degree in accounting from The Ohio State University and is a certified public accountant, although she is inactive at this time. We're so honored to have her, and I'm looking forward to what she has to share with us on this session today. Stephanie, we're in your hands. And I do believe you did share that they could put questions in the chat and we would address them at the time of the question. Am I correct?
Yes, yes. I'm not going to make everyone work hard as we talk and as I share, because I know how it is. Sometimes you're multitasking, or you maybe even listening in while you're getting a workout in. Hopefully you're prioritizing that self-care, which we'll talk a little bit about too. But if you have questions, I'm going to try to make sure we have a little bit of time at the end. So if there's something I didn't talk about or didn't cover, we can cover it then. So I'm excited to be with you all this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about seasons and cycles, and a lot of that from a career standpoint, but also from a life standpoint. And so when you hear the term seasons and you think about a career, you might start to think about some of the traditional stages of a career. Because if we were to be honest, in a lot of ways, many of us have been trained to think about a career as some form of ascension or climb that then leads to eventually a bit of a moderate or maybe an accelerated descend as we start to head toward retirement. But once you really step back and you start to decouple some of the notion of advancement from a title standpoint or an advancement standpoint, a career can look a lot more like a roller coaster, right? And with that roller coaster, we know that we're going to experience highs and we're going to experience lows. And a lot of time that comes in a very cyclical way. That means we're going to experience some highs and lows, and we're going to experience another set of highs and lows, and those things will continue. And so for that reason, I didn't want to talk about seasons today in the context of some of those traditional career stages. Instead, I wanted to spend some time talking about those seasons through a bit of a different lens. And if you think about how we all see the seasons change around us, we're in the moment now where thankfully we're changing from winter into spring. In a similar fashion, when we think about our career and our life, we go through different phases and different cycles. And those cycles can make us feel at times like we're going through a significant trial, but they can also make us feel like we're experiencing amazing triumph. And what I found through my career, as I've navigated several cycles myself in several years, over 20 plus, the more you're prepared for some of those curves, those setbacks, the valley moments, so to speak, knowing they're going to inevitably come, and then they're going to continue to come, and then they're going to cycle through again, the more resilient we can be. And what I love even more than the notion of resilience, because don't get me wrong, being resilient is extremely powerful. But what I love even more than just the notion of resilience is it also helps us to really feel a deep sense of gratitude when once you know that those cycles are going to happen and continue. Because when you get to what I call those mountain moments, those moments where you maybe feel like you're triumphing, you can really soak those in and feel grateful for those moments. Because if we're to be honest, sometimes we try to fast forward through those mountain moments because we're in like get it done mode, move on to the next thing mode. But once you recognize that it's important to pause and celebrate, you can feel a sense of gratitude when you're in those moments. And then conversely, when our valley moments come, because we know they're going to come, we can trust that those have a purpose as well, even if they might be a bit painful or frustrating or discouraging, depending on the moment. But it's really about how we choose to prepare for and anticipate a lot of those seasonal shifts, really with an element of intentionality. Because what that means is I can't just be in survival mode. That's not going to be enough. And so I don't want to just talk about this topic. You're probably like, okay, she's in finance. Why is she wanting to talk about seasons and cycles instead of numbers? But honestly, the reason why this topic is so important to me, and we're going to be friends for the next hour, which means that you have to love me and not judge me. That's the rule. But the reason why it's an important topic to me is because I've navigated a lot of cycles in my life so far, and I know there's more to come. And if I were to be honest, I haven't navigated all of them well, or maybe with the element of grace that I wish I would have. And as I look and I reflect in hindsight, if I would have been in some of these seasons and cycles, if I would have just been a bit more prepared, maybe a bit more aware, I feel like I could have shaped how I bended and twisted through some of those curves and navigated them much differently. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say that, I still fundamentally believe that a curve is still a curve and a valley is still a valley. And if we were to all to be honest, we'd prefer to avoid the curves and the valley moments. But the unlock that I've really discovered as I've gone through those seasons and those cycles is often it's less about the curve. And it's more about how I choose to intentionally endure through that curve. Now, this is probably a perfect place for me to also preface our time today and say that I am just representing the views of Stephanie today. I by no means profess to be an expert in this topic, but I do hope we can learn and grow together a bit as I share some of my personal learnings and the things that I've reflected on from enduring those various cycles myself. So feel free to keep what's helpful. Feel free to throw away or ignore anything that's not. Just don't tell me what you're throwing away. I don't want to know. But let's dive in today. I'd like to start with my favorite season, which is summer. I'm going to wait for Jenny to maybe move our slide forward. One more, Jenny. Okay, there we go. So I personally would like to think that everyone's favorite season is summer because it's mine. And if summer is not your favorite season, it's still okay. I said we're going to be friends for the next hour. I'm still going to fully accept you. I might only judge you a little bit. But just do me a favor for the purpose of our time today. Just act like summer's your favorite season where all the best things in your life happen. Because if you think about what we what summer symbolizes typically for all of us. It's typically a period where we feel growth, warmth, levels of abundance, so to speak, as things are brightening all around us. And the days are bright and they're long. And if you're like me, the more light in a day, I just navigate my days differently. I have more energy. I'm trying to soak it all in and do all the things. And if you think about it from a life perspective in a similar way, we have summer seasons, seasons that feel like personal growth, prosperity, triumph. Maybe we're even getting recognized. And so if you think about what summer looks like things like career advancement or expansion. Maybe you've got a new job or a promotion that you're receiving. Summer can look like a moment where you're building deeper and greater competence, maybe in an area that you're looking to build expertise in, or maybe in an area where you're just looking to differentiate yourself in a different way. But summer can also look like cultivating meaningful and impactful relationships, things that turn into then some amazing mentorship and sponsorship moments. But it can also look like receiving that personal and professional recognition, because maybe there's areas where you've excelled or you've had a pronounced impact either for your organization or even within your local community. And so summer can look like all of those things. But as we cycle through the seasons and we talk about what they look like, I also want to pause and talk about what they feel like. Because it's sometimes our feelings about a season that can really give us a clue to what season that we're actually in. So sometimes you can tell by what they look like, sometimes you can tell by what they feel like, and sometimes you can tell because of the combination of the two. So what does summer feel like? Summer often feels like confidence, contentment, maybe a sense of gratitude and pride. And you might ask, well, why do we feel more content in our summer season? Well, if you think about the notion of contentment, contentment is how you feel when you have everything you need. That means there's less of a sense or a feeling that you're lacking something or that you're missing out. So there's no FOMO in your summer season. But in summer, you also feel a heightened level of maybe completeness and appreciation and of being enough, because you're getting the feedback, or what I call the signals in the system, that helps you to really reaffirm where you stand. So you might feel content in summer in a different way. And you might also feel pride because your accomplishments are probably being valued, they're being recognized, they're being celebrated. And so that's what summer can feel like. But what I found is no matter what season that we're in, including summer, there are very intentional things we should do to ensure that we continue to thrive. And why is that important? Because you might say, well, I'm in summer. You said the best things happen in summer. So I'm just going to thrive by waking up and being in summer. But the reality is, no matter what season we find ourselves in, we're at risk of getting complacent, getting comfortable, or maybe even getting stuck. And so it's important that we don't allow ourselves to get complacent, comfortable, or stuck, even in summer. But that's not all, because the reality is we all know, hopefully I'm sure you've lived through cycles so far, every season has to shift. And so there's an element of us that we have to make sure that we're preparing for that shift, no matter what season we're in. And so let's talk a little bit about what thriving looks like in your summer season. When you're in your season of prosperity and triumph and recognition, one of the ways that you have to make sure that you continue to thrive in your summer season is to make sure that you avoid the pitfall of perfectionism. And why is this important? Because the reality is, in your summer season, you're at a higher risk of falling victim to one of the worst pressures out there, and that's the pressure to be perfect. Now, why would that be the case in summer? Because if we think about the root of perfectionism, it's really driven around the thought, what will other people think about me? Which we know is dangerous. So in your summer season, when you are getting recognized, you might fall victim to trying to earn that approval and acceptance even more so, because you might begin to believe that you are what you're accomplishing. Now, I heard someone once say, and I thought this was powerful, if you live your life searching for someone's validation, you will die when you don't receive it. And so perfectionism can also make us feel like we have to know everything, that we can't make mistakes or that we can't have failures. And so in your summer season, when you're quote unquote winning, when you're moving and shaking and being recognized, it's so important to recognize that you will likely feel even more risk of failing or falling short in the eyes of others. And so you have to be very intentional and fight against that pressure to be perfect. The other thing that I found is in your summer season, you're at higher risk of failing to fight for your balance. And that might sound a little bit counterintuitive, but if you think about the fact that when you're in your winning season, you can start to convince yourself that your achievement has to come at all costs. And that's in a lot of ways because some of the signals that we've gotten is that our hard work is one of the reasons why we've maybe gotten that recognition or that promotion. But what I found is what can help give you a greater sense of power and at the same time be very empowering is to recognize how important and life-changing it can be to balance your ambition. We all have ambition with your overall well-being. And there's no better time to do that than when you're in a season where you feel confident and you feel self-assured, especially when you think about your personal value proposition. Because it's really in that moment when establishing your personal boundaries will be so much easier. And then what it does, this is the part I love the most, is when those other seasons come, maybe the ones that are a little less bright and sunny, you can continue to reinforce your boundaries because you set them in a moment when you feel at your best and you feel your most confident. Now, I'm a firm believer based on what I've experienced that although often not intentional, others will always push your boundaries if you don't set the appropriate expectations and if you don't set those in a way that it really aligns with your personal values and your personal priorities, especially in a work environment where oftentimes, even now when we're working more hybrid than we ever had, people don't see as readily the fullness of your life. They don't understand all the things that maybe you're trying to juggle. And a lot of people also don't understand your value system or your priorities in the same way that you do. And so you have to help them understand by setting boundaries. Now, the flip side of that is I've learned that once you set your boundaries in a way that aligns with what you need, people will often respect those boundaries, especially when you're delivering, And so fighting for your balance is about setting boundaries, but it's not just about setting boundaries. And I feel like I have to say this because there's a lot of women on the line, and I know me, myself, I have not done this well at all moments during my life and my career, but prioritizing your self-care is so important in terms of finding that balance because it helps to strengthen you physically and mentally. And in addition to just that strengthening process that we all need, there's also an important element of recovery that needs to be built into your self-care plan because the demands of a career can take what I call a lot of pouring out, especially when you maybe are leading people or leading teams, and you need some things that you can do to pour back into you as well. And so if you continue to pour out without pouring back in, you will eventually empty yourself. And an empty vessel isn't something that can help in the way that you need to when you're trying to navigate your career. And so for me, recovery, I found, and this is funny because it's one of the elements of recovery for me is just the quality of my sleep. Now, I laugh because I remember the day when people had to convince me or force me to take a nap. Listen, I would pay to take a nap on some days now, a little further into my life and my career. But for me, I found that when I shortcut my sleep, I am not at my best and I'm not allowing myself to recover. But it's also things like having blocks of unscheduled or uncommitted time. I am so scheduled. I'm sure all of you are as well. Like there are moments where I just need to be free. I don't want an appointment. I don't want to have to be somewhere. I just want to be able to, and typically it's a Saturday. I try to find a Saturday here and there where I can just go with the flow and just be free in a way that sometimes my day-to-day doesn't allow. And that's because I know me and I know what I need. I need time with family and friends who make me laugh deeply and who accept all of this and what it entails at times. I need to recharge spiritually. And so I have determined, like, what does recharging for Stephanie look like? And in my summer season, even when I'm winning, I need to make sure I'm taking care of me. And if I have those habits established and those boundaries set, when I'm not in summer, I'll be able to hold to them even more. Okay, so we've talked about avoiding perfectionism and fighting for your balance. One other thing that I want to touch on quickly in terms of thriving in your summer season is remaining humble. Now, when I say humility, I don't want this to be perceived as downplaying your accomplishments or having low self-esteem. That's not what we're here for, right? Humility is around understanding your contributions, but understanding them in context. And so in a season where you're typically being praised and acknowledged to a greater degree, it's important to not start to think so highly of yourself that, again, you start to attach or attribute your value to the praise that you might be receiving in your summer season. Because when the season shifts, and it will, and the valley moment comes, you have to feel centered in who you are and what your value is, even if no one is showing you or telling you. And so it's important to just operate with that sense of humility and to know who you are, no matter what the signals in the system are. Okay, so you know I want to stay in summer because I told you it's my favorite season, and I slightly judge people if it's not theirs, but we do need to shift because I want to get through all the seasons today. So let's talk a little bit about fall. Fall is typically characterized by the leaves changing colors and in some ways a bit of a shedding, because it typically is known as a period of transition. And if we think about that shedding of the leaves, it can be likened to us letting go of dead things, maybe things that have fully served their purpose in our journey. And so what does fall look like? Fall typically looks like change and disruption, maybe some uncertainty, and again, some shedding of some things that we need to let go of. And we've cycled through life a bit, and so we all know that change is inevitable, whether it's our life or our careers. So that change can be things like a new environment, maybe a new set of expectations in our roles, a reorganization of some form that impacts us, or maybe even a new boss. And a lot of times that change can come unexpectedly. And along with that change, sometimes we can experience a sense of disruption where all of a sudden something that felt stable starts to feel turbulent, and where we might have felt calm or stable, we start to feel a bit bumpy and maybe erratic. And so when you think about what fall looks like, that change, that disruption, that uncertainty, all those things can naturally spur several feelings. And so if we were to think about what fall feels like, fall often feels like anxiety, worry, fear, maybe even insecurity. And so I want to pause for a moment, because as we're talking about certain seasons and what they feel like, it's also a great reminder that certain emotions that we may feel are natural in that season. We should not try to be robots. We should not try to prevent ourselves from feeling deeply and acknowledging those feelings. But what becomes a bit toxic is if we stay in them or we settle in them, especially as our seasons start to shift. So we really have to let ourselves feel and acknowledge the emotions of every season, but also remind ourselves that we can't stay there, especially in some of our more challenging seasons. And so when I say fall feels like anxiety, I'm talking more about the state of anxiety, not the trait of anxiety, which I know is a different dynamic that many unfortunately have to live with. But the state of anxiety is more about a temporary condition, one that might arise based on a certain situation. And I love how Brene Brown unpacks the notion of anxiety a bit, because she says that sometimes an intolerance for uncertainty can contribute to our anxiety level. So if that is true, one of the ways in which we can manage our state of anxiety in our fall season is to become more bold and more accepting of the realities of that uncertainty as it comes. And that doesn't mean I can choose to ignore the uncertainty, but it also means that I can't, and I know this is going to be hard for some of you, so brace yourselves. I can't try to control everything out of an attempt to eliminate or reduce that uncertainty. And so if I think about my personal experiences, I went through a very significant challenge at one point in my life and just added to the list among many challenges, because again, when you go through a lot of cycles, you're going to go through a lot of challenging moments. But this one in particular, I'll just say it was sometime in my 30s. And with this particular challenge, the shock to my system was so significant that it was the first time that I truly stepped back and I deeply realized that no matter how oblivious I may have chosen to be at times, there was very little about my life that I could truly control. Now, I say that, and I don't want you to think I'm advocating for us walking around with this "it is what it is" type of mentality. But what I mean by that is I can control me to a large degree on most days, not every day, because I'm not perfect. And some days you just have to reset. But I can control me to a large degree most days. But a lot of what truly impacts my life is the collision with things and people, and maybe even circumstances that I did not create, nor can I control. And so once you begin to realize that, you begin to live your life a little bit more free, and maybe you let go of some of the anxiety, which can be rooted in concerns around uncertainty, typically about the future, and things that haven't even happened yet. And so that's what fall can feel like. But let's talk a little bit about how we can still thrive in our fall season. When you're in a season of change and disruption and uncertainty and shedding, because when your fall season takes hold, it's the perfect time to start to prepare for that next phase or that next season to a degree. Not you don't want to jump into winter, but you can start your winterization mentality. And why is that important? Because I've learned that fall is often just the initial signal that we receive as to what might be coming next. And so why not start to prepare ourselves for the shift? And so it is about how we take advantage of our fall season, really to help establish a bit of a preparation process. Now, one of the things I've noticed I do through the years is I don't know if it's just me, but I'm okay if it is. When the initial period of cooler temperatures hit sometime in early fall, I deeply convince myself that I need to make sure my winter options are in order. I need boots, I need sweaters, I need turtlenecks. And sometimes I do, sometimes I'm laughing at myself. Sometimes I do that as if I don't have winter options from last winter sitting in my closet and in my dresser. And secretly, I may just want some new options, but something about that fall cold hit, that first snap of cool, I have to get ready. So if you think about that parallel, what can be powerful about our mentality and our approach to the fall seasons in our career is in that moment, similar to the weather beginning to shift and spur in us, or maybe just me, that notion of I better prepare. I don't just assume that what I had last winter will be enough to endure this coming winter, because the reality is I might need some new stuff. And so if we think about that, even though we're going to go through seasons and cycles, and we're going to build experience, and we're going to build wisdom, and we're going to build some amazing resources that help us better navigate the cycles that come next, we can't assume that our prior cycle through a season, whatever season that is, will be enough to equip us for what may lie ahead. So our mentality of preparation should have a little bit of a rear view and a windshield mentality. I need to reflect back a little bit through my rear view mirror and remember what I've been through and what I've learned and how those things can be applied going forward. But I also need to look forward to what's ahead a little bit, not in a way that creates anxiety, but acknowledge that it might be different and require some enhancements, so to speak, to my winterization strategy. And so a couple ways in which we start to prepare is we boost our mental fortitude and we lock into more of a growth mindset. And why is that important in fall? Because we have to train our mind to be stronger than our emotions. And the reality is in fall, we start to experience some really challenging emotions. And those challenging emotions only get a little bit harder in winter. And I can't always control what thoughts come or what emotions come, but I can control which thoughts to hold on to. And so it's important for us to remember that we need to be mentally strong, but it's also important for us to remember that our interpretation of our reality in that moment can truly change our experience of that reality. And so if I can lean more into a growth mindset, I can begin to shift my mentality and look for the purpose in the cycle that I'm entering, while also acknowledging some of the ways in which it might actually make me stronger or maybe wiser, or it could even usher in a much needed course correction, so to speak, from where I'm at versus where I need to be. Because if I were to be honest, sometimes the very season that I was fighting to avoid, I just didn't have time for it. It was the exact irritant that I needed to make a change that was well overdue. And so some seasons can be the disruption that we need to shake ourselves out of that moment of comfort and complacency, because in those places, growth is no longer available to us. So that mental fortitude and that growth mindset in fall is so critically important. And you'll need to continue to build on it, because if you wait until winter comes, trust me, it's a little too late. And why do I say that? Because when you're deeply entrenched into one of the most challenging seasons in your career, there are times when you just don't have the strength. And if you start to try to build when you're at that point, it's going to be even harder. And so starting to cultivate some of that in our fall season is important. Now, the other thing that's helpful in our fall season is to begin to activate our support network. And when I say that, I'm not advocating for only at using your support network in fall. You should always be cultivating that strong professional and personal network, given there is no moment or season in your career, good or bad, where you should try to go at it alone. But fall is an especially important time to start to think about how you can boost leveraging your network, because you can do things like start to proactively seek out some guidance or maybe some mentorship from some colleagues who you know have weathered many fall seasons, or maybe a season that looks like the one that you're feeling or observing. You can use their advice to start to identify areas where you might make some adjustments to how you might navigate the season better. And sometimes you need to just use your network from I'll call it emotional support standpoint, trusted friends or trusted colleagues that can just be a safe space where you can go to be fully human, to be fully vulnerable, and dare I say, a little bit messy at times, because what I've learned is you can't be messy with or in front of just anybody, but you need to be human. And some people simply can't handle it. They'll give you bad advice. They'll judge you in a moment of vulnerability and humanness, so to speak. But you need people who can be empathetic to what you're going through, but also encouraging. And so you need to know who within your network can be that emotional support. And I also heard someone once say, and I love this, in times of fear and uncertainty, you have to refuse your fears. So that's the control you take. But you also have to build a network of people that will refuse them with you. And I love that, because what it does is it helps to guard me from me. I can leverage my network to help gut check what I'm saying to myself and what I'm perceiving about my situation versus maybe the reality of that situation. Now, why do I say that? Because I can say this from a genuine place. When our emotions are high and we're in a challenging space, our emotions can skew our sense of reality. And so sometimes the things that I think I'm seeing are not real, and I need someone who can help me level set. And so I need my trusted confidants to help translate what I'm feeling and seeing to what the reality of the situation actually might be. But also, they can help me check what I'm saying about myself to myself. Because if you're like me, you can be your own worst enemy sometimes simply by the things that you say to yourself about yourself. And so you need that network to operate on your behalf in a multitude of ways. Now, one of my toxic traits, again, we're friends, so you're not judging me, but one of my toxic traits is I struggle to ask for help. And I struggle to ask for help because I grew up in a single parent household with a mother that worked multiple jobs in an effort to provide for my sister and I. And so I learned three things very early on in my life, good or bad. Number one, you work hard. Number two, you should be independent. And number three, you should try not to be a burden, especially to a mother who's trying to hold it down. And so leaning on my support network is something that for someone who's wired like me takes even more effort and even more trust and even more vulnerability, because I've got to push beyond my natural inclination to go at it alone, to not want to feel like I'm putting my problems on other people and I'm putting myself in a place where I feel like I'm maybe being a burden or becoming a burden. Now, it took me some cycles through life and experiences to realize just how entrenched those three beliefs were in my psyche, so to speak. And it really came to a greater awareness when I went through one of the most difficult seasons of my life, both professionally and personally. And I tried to go through it largely alone, even though I didn't realize I was. I did. And let me just tell you, I would not recommend it. And so why do I share that with you today? I'm not sharing it just so you can understand more about me. I'm sharing it because what I found is self-awareness is so important. So self-awareness helps you to become more in tune with the things about you that could get in the way of you thriving in each season that you're in. And we all have things about us. Let's call it our personal baggage that we've accumulated during our journey. And some of that baggage can impact how we think about how we navigate situations. In order to be the best version of ourselves and thrive in every season, we have to know when to leave some baggage at a prior destination and when to let some of that go. Now, I also joke that sometimes people try to leave their baggage with you, and you have to know when to be fully in return to sender mode if and when that happens. But if you're self-aware around some of the things that you know you need to do, and then you couple that with self-awareness around some of the things that maybe are deep in your psyche or your personality or traits that you have that might get in the way of that, it can just help you manage a bit better. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about summer. We've talked a little bit about fall and what it takes to thrive. Now I'm going to force us to talk about my least favorite season, which is winter. Now, if I say that and I laugh because my youngest daughter is somewhere rolling her eyes, and she's 13, so that probably makes sense on a number of levels. But she's rolling her eyes because she actually loves winter. And if you're like me as a parent, sometimes you wonder how your children turn out the way that they do, because she clearly can't be my child and love winter. But I know some people love winter, but you don't love this kind of winter, if I were to have to guess. And so if you think about winter from a symbolization standpoint, it's typically hallmarked by things like cold, extreme conditions, challenging conditions. And if we start to parallel that to our life and our careers, we all have our fair share of winters. Periods of time when the storm, so to speak, comes in so severe and the hazard signs are starting to go off all around you. And maybe a road that you drove on just yesterday with ease and with comfort starts to feel a bit treacherous in a different way. And maybe for the first time, you feel ill-equipped to drive that same road because you fear that you might crash or that you might get stuck. And so it can be something as simple as leaving your house and that starts to feel dangerous, or maybe even doesn't feel like it's worth the extra effort because there's storms going on all around you. And if I were to say it differently, I would say winter season really changes the game a bit, and it disrupts a lot of what once felt normal, what once might have felt safe, maybe even what once felt a little bit easy. And so what does winter look like? Winter looks like adversity. It looks like setbacks and failure and hardship, and it might look like loss. And at times it can even look like burnout. Now, loss can be things like an actual job loss, or maybe a demotion of some form. Your responsibilities are maybe taken away in some form. It can look like a setback where there's a moment where I'll call it the infamous room around you changes. So a key sponsor that you might have had that was advocating and fighting on your behalf is no longer in the room supporting you in that way. That can feel like look like a setback. But winter can also look like failure, because maybe you made a mistake, And that mistake wasn't catastrophic, so to speak, but maybe it left some residue, some long memories, so to speak, for those who observed you make that mistake and who can't or simply won't forget the mistake that you made. Maybe you failed through some damaged relationships and you did so like in a very real and challenging moment where you were just trying to push an initiative forward or um, move an agenda forward, but you did that without bringing others along in the right way. And so winter can look like failure, but winter can feel like a lot of things too. It can feel like disappointment. It can feel like discouragement. It can feel like anger. And it can even feel like shame. And disappointment is another emotion that I love how Brene Brown unpacks, because she says that disappointment arises because of unmet expectations. Unmet expectations. And the more significant our expectations, the more significant our disappointment. And so in winter, if you think about the season of winter and all that it brings, the reality is we're at a higher risk of facing disappointment because we're in a season of adversity and setbacks and failure and loss. And we're experiencing those things in a very real and sometimes raw way. And so if disappointment starts with our expectations, that means our expectations are set based on both ourselves, but also some of the people around us. And it doesn't always mean that our expectations are valid or true, so to speak. But if we start to pause and say, all right, let me be in tune with where I've set expectations, especially high ones, it can create a bit of a litmus test for us that we can then use to assess our expectations, where we've placed them, but also understand our emotions more fully in those moments where we sense that disappointment creeping up. And if we're aware of those expectations, it provides those clues. That doesn't mean we start to lower our expectations by any means. I'm not advocating for that. I think we should shoot for the stars. But in a moment or a season of disappointment, it really does help us better understand how we might navigate those feelings and do so in a healthier way. And why do I say that? Because one of the challenges of feeling disappointment is if we leave it unaddressed, it can lead to things like numbness, bitterness, cynicism, maybe. And maybe you might have had someone's face pop into your head. Don't put their name in the chat. But the reality is we all know people where we can see on them and we experience through them the fact that they've gotten stuck in some level of disappointment. And what it's led to is bitterness and cynicism. And so we don't want to be someone who gets stuck in our disappointment in our winter season. But we can also feel angry in winter because in our minds, something or someone else is to blame for what we perceive to be an unfair or an unjust situation. And maybe even a situation that then created the adversity or the setback or the failure or the loss. So we can get angry in winter, but we can also feel a deep sense of shame because shame is all tied into how we might feel flawed and how we might feel unworthy. And that unworthiness can be tied to our belonging, our sense of connection, but it can also be tied to maybe I'm unworthy of that success or that promotion or that advancement that I was seeking, because we can start to believe that maybe something is wrong with me. I must be flawed. I must be unworthy of receiving or earning that expectation that I was holding so tightly to. And so if you think about winter, what it looks like, what it feels like, it's a challenging season without a doubt, but it's also a season that can lead to some really amazing growth, especially when we face it head on. When we face it from a place of power and intentionality, we have so much to gain. And so let's talk about a bit about what thriving looks like in your winter season. When you're facing those adversities, those setbacks, that failure, hardship, and it's all around you. Now, I wish it was as simple as me telling you to bundle up. I try to tell my daughters that when it gets cold, and again, teenage theme, they don't listen. But thriving in winter really requires a combination of things. And three that I've found the most important to me personally is endurance, adaptability, and resilience. And why are these three things combined so important? Because it is possible that we get so discouraged and so disappointed, even going back into our fall season to a degree, that we stop dreaming, that we stop engaging with the people in the world around us, that we stop fighting for the success that we aspire to achieve. And so it's important for us to thrive in our winter season and to counteract those natural tendencies to pull back. And so let's talk a little bit for a moment just around the difference between endurance and resilience. So endurance is all about sustaining effort over time without giving up. And that can be both physical and mental, but think about that. Sustaining effort over time without giving up. That without giving up part is extremely important, because there's a lot of times we just want to tap out, if we were to be honest, when winter comes. Resilience, on the other hand, is about how our ability to bounce back from any setback or adversity that we might be experiencing, but not just if we can bounce back, but how quickly we recover. So resilience is all about the recovery and the quickness of that recovery. So that means that thriving in winter is not a hunker down, I'm going to wait it out type of mentality. We can't go into hibernation modes like some animals do and hope that we can just come back out when things are bright and sunny again, because that's more passive in terms of an approach. We need to show endurance and adaptability and resilience. And all of that is about taking control and actively navigating through our winter season. And so if I think about endurance a little bit more, and we talked about sustaining effort without giving up, I might draw a parallel between endurance and running. Now, if I have any hardcore runners on the line today and you guys want to network with each other, feel free to do that in the chat. I'm not running any marathons myself. I don't profess to be a hardcore runner. But if you think about running, you have to build endurance to be a great runner, without a doubt. And there are some key hallmarks to becoming a great runner, because you have to be able to maintain a steady pace for an extended period of time, and to do that while you're pushing through fatigue and discomfort. And so as a runner, you can build endurance using a variety of tactics. It's never just one thing that a runner does when they're building endurance. And so what are some of those tactics? They're typically focused on, number one, gradual progression. Because if you push yourself too hard and too fast and too quickly, you're often at a greater risk of injuring yourself. And so runners know when they're training that they have to progress gradually in terms of training their body. But they also introduce things like strength training and proper nutrition, because you need to add some other things besides just running to the equation to help strengthen you and ensure that you have the right fuel for both your mind and your body. The act of running alone is not enough. And lastly, they need to introduce some mental training, because you need some mental tactics to help you push through when your body wants to give up. Again, because think about that fatigue and that discomfort that comes when you're having to endure a long race or a long winter season. So there's some mental training that runners take advantage of. So I know I'm talking about how someone can build endurance in running, but that same strategy can work when we're looking to build endurance in our winter season. First of all, we can't expect endurance to come overnight. We do have to start with the right expectations and understand that it's a process. And because it's a process, we should celebrate the gradual progression that we find ourselves experiencing as we're building that endurance. Now, remember we talked about, if I don't have the right expectations, I end up with disappointment. And so my mindset has to be set on the fact that endurance just doesn't come overnight. But we also have to strengthen ourselves in a multitude of ways. And that's being mindful of what we're consuming, so to speak, both in a multitude of forms. But it means we have to protect our mental health like never before. And lastly, similar to a runner building endurance, we have to be willing to push our limits, because we have to trust that we can endure more than we might believe, and definitely more at times than what we've ever encountered. And so that belief and that willingness to push through and not give up is critically important. So let's talk a little bit about resilience, because we said in the beginning, it's our ability to bounce back and to do that quickly. And so a lot of times our level of resilience is a direct reflection of our capacity to withstand things, including stress, obstacles, challenges. And a lot of what helps us build resilience is really our state of mind. Finding a way to stay positive, finding a way to stay optimistic, even in a very challenging season. And so a couple of ways in which we can start to build that resilience is, I'll say, number one, fall back on fall. Fall back on fall. Because in fall, we talked about how important it was to begin to build that mental fortitude and that growth-oriented mindset. And so again, that's often shaped by us shifting how we choose to look at the situation or the season we're in. And so instead of ruminating in the negative, the challenging, the frustrating aspects of our winter season, with all of its abundance of adversity and setbacks and failure, we can instead choose to focus on all there is to gain. We can gain growth, we can gain learnings, we can gain strength, we can gain wisdom. And the beauty of all of that gain is it's not just to help us, but we'll be better positioned to also help some others who we mentor or sponsor who might at some point be going through something very similar. It really is a choice in terms of shifting our mentality. And so the other way we fall back to fall is to remember that support network that we began to activate in fall. Relationships are also a critical element of resilience, because in your winter season, you need support. You need people checking on you and encouraging you, and you need more advice because you're typically encountering challenges that are harder and maybe even new. And so you've got to fall back on a couple of those things we talked about in fall, but you also need to focus on your mentality in terms of what you can control. Because if we don't acknowledge what we can control and let go of what we can't, it becomes very difficult to navigate and build resilience in our winter season. We have to know the difference between what we can control and what we can't. And sometimes that means we have to pause and we have to really take inventory of what's happening around us, and of that, what can we take power over in terms of control, and what can we take power over by letting go. And lastly, one of the other things that it's important to do is to remember all that you are and all that you represent that transcends that winter season that you're in. And part of that is falling back and remembering the skill sets and abilities that you've developed. Remembering the unique and powerful things that only you can bring to the table in the way that you do. And reminding yourself that none of that has changed just because you happen to be in this challenging winter season, even if the things around you have changed or become more challenging. And so remembering who you are, all that you are, and what you bring to the table, and not letting that be shaken, so to speak, just because you're in a winter season. And so it's important to be in to have endurance. It's important to have resilience. And quickly, I just want to touch on adaptability, because adaptability is all about making adjustments and showing flexibility, not just for the sake of those adjustments, not for the sake of flexibility, but as a means of productively dealing with the new challenges you're facing. So by showing adaptability, you're able to embrace the change and do that while making the adjustments that you need to thrive. And not everyone is willing to embrace change. Even though oftentimes whatever changes is not going to change back and there's no value in fighting it, but it is a choice to be adaptable, to observe, to learn, and then adjust. And so there are ways you can thrive in winter, no matter how challenging it might be. But one of the good things about enduring a really difficult season, and one that might be your least favorite like mine, is it does get you excited and grateful when the shifts to spring happen. So let's talk for a moment just about spring, because spring represents new life. It looks like reemergence, reflection, renewal, and transformation. But spring feels like calm, it feels like hope, and it feels like relief in a lot of senses, because coming out of winter, the calm sets in as you're able to settle a bit, which then allows you to pause, reflect, and learn from that winter season. But it also feels like hope. And I heard someone once say that hope's a function of struggle, and that we develop hope not during the easy or comfortable times, but through adversity and discomfort. And so there would be no hope in spring if there wasn't adversity in winter. And if you think about that transition from winter to spring, a lot of times in early spring, the plants and trees actually still look more like death than life, right? It looks like they've only lost versus gained. But what we can't see is that during that winter season, their roots were always there. They were strong, they were steadfast, they were keeping them grounded and feeding them. And once they blossom and bloom later in spring, that transformation and that growth will be more visible. And why do I share that? Because similarly, if we think about our winter experiences and that transition process, it's often the hope of what's to come that we really have to grasp hold of, because our full transformation in all its glory just won't be appearing yet. And it likely won't be visible, especially to those around us. So you have to just know it's coming. So let's just touch for a moment on what thriving looks like in spring. When you're in your season of reemergence, reflection, renewal, and transformation, one of the things that you have to do is to release the residue. Because if you're not careful, your winter season can end in terms of what it looks like, but the feelings of winter can linger. So you've got to do some spring cleaning, so to speak. You've got to clean out those closets. We have to be intentional about clearing out that mental and emotional clutter from winter, because it is one of the hardest seasons to endure. And it can leave some trauma and some triggers that we can't get comfortable with once we transition out. And I'll give you an example. I physically transitioned out of a winter season in my career at one point, but I hadn't mentally transitioned. And I didn't realize it until someone in my support network called me out for how I was projecting the realities of my winter onto my spring. And so what do I mean by that? I was making assumptions about my new season and some of the people in it based on the pain of my winter. So no one was getting a free pass. Everybody wasn't to be trusted. And I'm just saying that. I'm just joking. But like, what happened was I wasn't truly giving everyone a fair chance, because the measuring stick that I was using to evaluate them was based on some residue from my winter. And so I had to do a mental reset, so to speak. So it's important to let that residue go. But also, it's important to leverage your learnings while you're leaning into your new, because coming out of your winter season, you have to process those learnings and use that reflection time intentionally to drive your personal and professional growth. You might need to make adjustments or course corrections. A lot of times when I came out of my winter seasons in my career, there were a lot of domino effects it created. Sometimes I just gained personal strength and growth. Other times I gained clarity around my strengths and weaknesses, or clarity around my purpose. And in some moments it led to a breaking in my career that then helped me to rebuild something much better. And so come out of your winter season expecting to be a different person, but a better person. And maybe just one watch out that I'll throw out: if you're not careful, you might try to go back to exactly who you were before winter to find that quick comfort and that sense of normalcy again. But my advice to you would be, don't settle. I promise you the 2.0 or the 3.0 or maybe the 4.0 version of you that's waiting to emerge with some really hard work will be so much better. And so that just brings me to my last point on how to thrive in spring, which is to fully bloom, because you can emerge and transform. It's an opportunity for personal growth, to shape and transform who you are as a person, as a professional, as a leader. And sometimes it can usher in some really amazing new beginnings. I've often grown the most personally through my adversity. So don't shrink, don't bury yourself, don't settle, shine brightly, and make sure that you bloom completely after you've endured the harshness of a winter. And so somehow we're almost out of time. And I feel like it went too fast, but we did get through all the seasons together this morning. But one of the things that I love about the reality of our seasonal shifts and cycles is, if there was no winter, I would take spring and summer for granted, without a doubt. And if there was no fall, I would be more at risk of not preparing for the harsh realities of winter. And so my wish for you is that as you're on your journey, embrace it with all the twists, the turns, the cycles, the highs and the low, and approach it with power and purpose and intentionality, so that you can fight to thrive no matter what season you're in. And that's harder in winter than it is in summer. But I also hope for you that on your journey, you might become more like the evergreen tree. Because if you think about evergreen trees, they retain their leaves throughout the seasons, and in a way that many think symbolizes perseverance. So evergreens represent some of those enduring qualities of life: our values, our relationships, our guiding principles. And those things can remain true and pure despite any external changes that might be happening around us. And honestly, they can give a really great element of stability for us. And so I just want to thank you for spending time this morning. I hope that there's something that you can take to strengthen or encourage you along your journey, because I know the journeys are far and wide and deep, and not all of those are sunshine and butterflies, but there really is purpose in every season that we're navigating. And there's so much power that we can find in each and every moment. And we're better at the end because of it all. So thank you for spending time with me this morning.
Amazing, amazing. Definitely, I think we all can take away some very key strategic points. Yes, empowering. This is definitely empowering and a great launch into the pool sessions. You are definitely Mrs. Revish, a powerful, unmistakable legacy leader. And I appreciate all the wisdom that you've imparted to us this morning, now going into the afternoon. Simply amazing. I know that I'm definitely going to go back and review this in our archives, because we do have all of these in our archives. And you have just set it up really clearly for our next presenter. I believe it's Jordan. Jenny put it out there. Jenny, feel free to jump in and share with me who's the next. Oh, next week is Jordan Wells, and we are excited about Jordan as well. You know, you've done a lot with helping us plan these sessions, but I'm so glad that you stepped from behind the scenes, Stephanie, and presented on today. Thank you all so much for coming today. Remember, you can go to franklin.edu/leadership center and view this presentation once again. And this is just week 1 of our pool session. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and remember to manage your seasons.